Hi, my name is Scott Crows and I'm an anatomy and physiology instructor at Shasta College. In this part of our video series of understanding the coronavirus vaccine, I'll focus on three interrelated areas. First, we'll look at the structure and function of DNA and mRNA and how proteins are produced in your cells. This is going to provide a solid basis of understanding of how the coronavirus infects your cells and how mRNA vaccines work to protect you against the coronavirus. So let's begin by going over the basics of DNA and mRNA. The genetic instructions for how to build us and keep our cells alive is stored within the nucleus of our cells in structures known as chromosomes. Chromosomes consist of the genetic material known as DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid and is made of the building blocks called nucleotides, often represented by the letters T, A, G, and C. The pairing and binding of these nucleotides give the classical double helix structure that DNA is known for. A gene is just a particular sequence of nucleotides that provides the instructions for how to build a protein. You can look at chromosomes and their genes as a blueprint or recipe book for making proteins. But DNA can't build the proteins on its own. It needs mRNA, which stands for messenger ribonucleic acid, and special organelles called ribosomes. Like DNA, mRNA is also made of nucleotides, but there are differences, such as mRNA is single-stranded. Here, a Game of Thrones character shows a great example. RNA is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. The instructions in DNA are extremely valuable, and thus never leave the protection of the cell's nucleus. It's like a rare library book that you can't check out. It can only be read in the library. If you want to take the book's information out of the library, you need to make a copy. The cell does the same thing. When it needs to make a particular protein, a copy of those instructions are made in the form of mRNA. This is where the M in messenger RNA comes from. It's an instructional message from the DNA on how to make the protein. The beauty of mRNA, though, is that it can leave the nucleus. Once in the cytoplasm, organelles called ribosomes bind to mRNA, read the instructions, and assemble the protein. The mRNA is temporary. Once enough of the proteins are made, the mRNA is broken apart. Now that you have an understanding of how proteins are made, we next look at how the coronavirus infects your cells. The coronavirus, or SARS-CoV-2, which stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, Coronavirus 2, is a virus that can cause COVID-19 disease, which stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. The corona portion of the name describes the spike-like proteins that surround the virus, giving it a crown-like appearance. The Latin term for crown is corona. These spike proteins are important, as they bind to receptors on a cell and trick the cell to bring in the virus. Once inside, the virus releases its genetic material that's in the form of messenger RNA. The cell's own ribosomes bind to the viral RNA and build the components for new virus. The virus tricks our cells into making more of the virus. The newly made viruses are released from the cell and can affect other cells through the same process. At the time of making this video, two companies, Pfizer and Moderna, have received FDA approval for their mRNA vaccines and are being distributed. They both were developed and worked in a similar fashion. To make the vaccine, scientists isolated the portion of the coronavirus mRNA genome that has the instructions for making just the spike protein. They made lots of copies of the mRNA for the spike protein and packaged it into lipid nanoparticles, which are similar in structure to the lipid transport vesicles used in our body. After injection of the vaccine, the mRNA for the spike protein enters a cell, and using the cell's ribosomes makes these spike proteins that are found on the coronavirus. These spike proteins can then be used to train our immune system to recognize and kill the actual coronavirus if we come into contact with it, and thus protects us from becoming sick. Details of immune system function and the way it attacks the coronavirus will be discussed in other videos of the series. It's important to note that these mRNA vaccines only contain instructions for making the spike protein, so you are never exposed to the virus and cannot get COVID-19 from the vaccine. The mRNA doesn't affect your DNA, as it never enters a nucleus and is degraded soon after the spike proteins are made. In our Shasta College Coronavirus Informational site, you'll find links to other videos that provide more details about the topics I covered. Thank you and stay safe.